From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker, an attorney.
Hello and welcome. Are we recording? Yes. I'm new at this. I apologize. I'm Don Hudson. Welcome to Ask Isaacs. Greg Isaacs, of course. And Jeff. You know Jeff as well. Lori is not here today because she is on the honor flight. We have 35 women veterans going to Washington, D.C. They're probably in D.C. as we come to you live, and then she'll be back tonight about 7:30, 7:40 with all of them aboard. We look forward to hearing all the stories on that. But right now, we are talking about our legal system, and we're focusing on celebrities and court cases and the headlines. I mean, recently had Justin Timberlake, kind of a straightforward DUI type case, involved him and him alone, and then you have Sean Diddy Combs arrested for charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. Obviously much more serious, and legal analyst Greg Isaacs is here to talk about that. How do we, when it comes to celebrities and how they get dealt with, and even on a local level, you know, you have some people that would kind of be that celebrity. Do you have to approach those cases differently than someone that most people don't know?
Well, you know, Don, that's a good question. And what happens when you have the specter of a high-profile case, you know, whether it's just a totally gruesome, horrific case, or it involves a celebrity, you know, it puts kind of a Hubble telescope on everything that happens, on what the judge says and does, what the lawyers do, what they file, every pleading that when we go to the courthouse and file pleadings, they're innocuous. Right. In a celebrity high-profile case, every word is leaked, it's on television, it's on the internet. But this is interesting. You know, we've seen prosecutors of late utilize a charging tactic, RICO, right. Which the feds use to take down the mob, because it's a very broad.
Which is interesting because that's where people think of it, and then Donald Trump was caught up in something like that as well, and then
and look at R. Kelly, you know, R. Kelly was charged with RICO. RICO is very analogous to a conspiracy case.
Well, first of all, RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organization.
There you go.
Right, and basically you have to have a crime that's alleged in the indictment. You have to have two or more overt acts. It has to be a corporation, a partnership, an association, or a group of individuals engaging in this activity that's alleged in the indictment. And here's what's interesting about this RICO indictment, because they're typically extraordinarily broad. Like, for example, Young Thug, the rapper in Atlanta, his indictment has 29 co-defendants. In the Diddy case, Sean Combs, there are no co-defendants. So we know that either someone is cooperating, getting ready to cooperate, and they're going to have to supersede that indictment, because you can't have an organization without individuals to make up the organization. So really interesting, and this indictment, Don and Jeff, is only 3 counts, and it's simple but very powerful.
Do you think it stays that way, though?
No, this indictment, I think, is a placeholder, and it's going to get superseded as people cooperate and this investigation spreads. But the first count's the RICO Act, very broad. The second count is sexual exploitation, sex trafficking by fraud, force, and coercion. And then the third count is transportation to engage in prostitution across state lines. Sean Combs is looking at a minimum of 15 years, and in federal court, that's day for day, to life. So very significant consequences.
Because of those types of charges, do you think, and would you expect him, if he has information about other people that could be involved in some of these things, to just start naming names for a lesser sentence? Because what I've been hearing, reporting-wise, and what I've been reading in different news articles, is that they've got a pretty locked-up, solid case here. But he also knows lots of other people that were involved in some of the things he was involved in.
Well, you know, the feds love cooperation. Federal cases are cooperation driven, and you have what's the cooperation paradox. If you're the last one in, you don't have anything to offer, you don't get a sentencing reduction. But typically, you cooperate from the bottom up, bottom of the conspiracy, bottom of the RICO case. You don't do it from the top down, because Sean Combs is the target. All the resources, the search warrant, all the investigation, But, you know, again, it's a mirror image of the R. Kelly RICO case where, I mean, the allegations are salacious and unbelievable. That he
and long-standing, too, because I know that 50 Cent weighed in because he's making a documentary, and he said this is decades. This spans decades.
What we hear from the feds, the U.S. Attorney's Office out of the Southern District of New York, this has been ongoing, allegedly ongoing since 2008, 2009. Apparently he allegedly engaged in freakouts, which were highly orchestrated parties where individuals engaged in sex. He used force and coercion, would secretly record people to manipulate them after the fact. Narcotics was used to manipulate people into engaging in this conduct. But, you know, when you talk about RICO, sometimes you sit there and scratch your head and go, God, this isn't an organized conspiracy or organization. But if what the government says is true, this was a very well organized criminal enterprise for, of all things, the purpose of engaging in sexual conduct, Jeff.
But I think also, you know, in looking at the documents there is a hierarchy involved, and that's what you were mentioning about going from the bottom up to the top down. Part of a RICO case is establishing the organizational components of the organization, and so I think, Greg, if you want to kind of go deeper into this, when you're proving a RICO case, there's overt acts and other acts, and so let's talk about, you know, like we want to have these, you know, the salacious allegations are one thing, but then there's also instructions and covering and fraud and money, and there's a lot that goes into these.
And, you know, Don, back to your point about high-profile cases, now, this is in federal court. Right. So when it's in federal court, there are no cameras, which, you know, my friends in the media don't like. Because if this was in state court, this would be a circus. A three-ring circus.
We're all old enough to remember the difference between O.J. Simpson's trial, where the cameras were catching everything, and Trump's trial, where they had to come out and tell us what had happened in some of those trials.
Right. They have sketch artists. I don't know where they hide or what they do in the off season. And then you have a high-profile federal case, and lo and behold, we see the sketch artists rendering of what happened in court that day. Really remarkable.
I sat next to one, by the way, when I worked in Washington, D.C., and he had the back of my head in the thing, and I asked him how much it would cost me. They sell those for a lot of money. I just remember going, well, I'm not paying that for the back of my head in your sketch.
But back to your point, Jeff, you know, a RICO case is an organization designed for an illegal purpose, and you only have to have two overt acts for the criminal conduct alleged in the indictment. And think about this. So to make this criminal enterprise work for the purpose of having a 2, 3, 4 day freak off where people were engaged in sex, you have to transport the sex workers across state lines. You have to pay the sex workers. You had to set up the venue. You had to get someone to buy illegal narcotics to distribute. You had to get someone to illegally, surreptitiously record the sexual activity. You had to have assistants. You had to have cash. I mean, think about all the work that went in to a party for self-gratification.
And one thing also to point out here is that Diddy, he is not, I mean, he is in prison and in jail, and he is, at least from the moment, not getting out, and it doesn't seem very likely that he's going to get out in any sort of circumstance. They was denied pretrial release due to risk of flight, access significant wealth, and travel. So, Greg, I mean, if you've got a client who's stuck in there, that's going to make it a little more difficult. There's going to be some pressure on his team to do something about that, or can they? I guess they can't.
Well, what they did, what they could do, and under the federal rules of civil procedure, when you go before the magistrate and there is an order of detention pre-trial, then you can appeal it to another district court judge, which they did, and they said no. Now, this is, I believe, a presumption case in terms of a presumption of being detained. But let me tell you, it's very rare in federal court for someone of Sean Combs' stature to be detained and for them to say that he is a flight risk. You know, they were willing to post a $50 million bond willing, you know, to take a lot of steps just to be free to do it. But let me tell you, when you have a client that's in custody, it changes the dynamic because, you know, your client's in a cage. The mental state of the client is not what it should be. It's very difficult. Like in a high-profile case like this, you're going to have hours of surreptitious recordings. You're going to have tons of documents, computer this and computer that, and it's very difficult. You know, when you're in your office, you have your setup, you have your screens, you got your projectors, you have your investigators. It doesn't work that way at Rikers. So, you know, it makes it harder for everybody, and it makes it really hard to fine-tune that defense. But here's what's interesting to me. Who is going to be the people that cooperate? And, you know, once this, if it does go to trial, you know, and rumors are part of the nomenclature in a celebrity high-profile trial. Don, I hear, you know, there's some A-listers. It's kind of got that Jeffrey Epstein kind of syndrome to it. So, you know, it's going to be remarkable. Here's where life, unfortunately, imitates art. Because apparently all the songs that he was singing and producing, he was living, engaging in this lifestyle of a criminal enterprise.
That's that cage you mentioned. According to the New York Times, he is in the same dorm-style facility housing unit as Sam Bankman-Fried, the accused Bitcoin cryptocurrency financier from the FTX scam. So that's the title of the New York Times said, "Strange Cellmates in a Brooklyn Jail."
Right. I want to jump over the Justin Timberlake case just for a minute, just a little, bring it down a little bit. Was that treated with his plea deal and the punishment, the monetary punishment, and the community service? Was that pretty much how it would have happened to anybody with a lesser name?
You know, it sounds like he actually, I mean, he got what appeared to me to be a standard deal for a first offense DUI. But what was interesting, and I heard some pundits criticize the deal, he agreed to do more than John Q. Public normally wouldn't do, because, you know, normally John Q. Public doesn't want to hear about a drunk that got pulled over and did 2 days in jail. But Justin Timberlake is, you know, as part of his plea agreement, is going to go out and do public service, make some statements and do that. So it's atypical, Don, but atypical in a way you wouldn't think.
Yeah.
So he actually got a more severe sanction than the public. Normally in a celebrity, you see it happening, the dynamic gets flipped. They get
kind of just, yeah, I mean, because it was like a $500 fine and 25 hours.
Yes, but he also
this is license for a year.
Yeah, and agreeing to do that PSA, you've got to realize that someone of his high-profile stature, like, that has a value, and you know, it's a little bit different than playing, you know, yes, there's a public relations aspect to it. He is messaging, I did something wrong, please don't do this wrong. That does come at a cost to his reputation, and so you can say, well, he could have just said no comment, disappeared, and maybe 6 months from now everybody's forgotten about it. But by saying, yes, I'm going to be public about this, I'm going to say, I did wrong, please don't follow my example, then that's getting, I guess, a little more value for the public than you would have otherwise.
And think about this. We want to talk about some other, you know, celebrity criminal prosecutions. One of East Tennessee's faves just recently that was in town, Morgan Wallen. I mean, think about this. Sometimes the hardest people in a celebrity prosecution are the prosecutors, the people that get affected the most. So let's say you're the guy in Nashville that's charged with prosecuting Morgan Wallen for throwing the chair off the top of the bar, a felony. Everybody's watching. Now, you know, when Billy Bob from Montana comes to Nashville and chucks the chair over the balcony, what happens to him versus what happens to Morgan? Now, you know, I think a lot of people are pulling for Morgan, but a lot of people are saying, hey, prosecutor, do your job. So that's just kind of the dynamic in these cases.
That part, the people that are in charge. And then, of course, the judges, too. I mean, in some of these high-profile cases. So I think we dug into this pretty well, looked at it pretty well. I'm not sure how this all wraps up, other than to say that we will be back live We'll be back on TV at about 5:30, 5:40
Right.
with Greg asking some more questions, but we appreciate you watching Ask Isaacs.
Thanks.
Thank you.